Wait for it, and we're live. Hey, all you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans, it's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just a couple of nerdy veterans and one chaos coordinator geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies. A place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. We are the podcast that puts the fun in dysfunction. So without further ado, we're going to let our guest, Miss Jana S Brown, otherwise known as Jena Rey, who's the personality we get to talk to today. If you could introduce yourself to our listeners and viewers at home.
Hi there. If you've been listening to Blasters and Blades for a while, you have probably heard from me on the panels, but I'm really, really glad to be back today. I am Jana S Brown. I also write under the pen name Jena Rey, and that is where all the science fiction, urban fantasy, and other such stuff lives. So that's who we're focused on today.
Outstanding. What we really need to do is you get like this the face mask where like the front has got one face and you turn your head sideways, you got another, and then another, like the block thing going on. We get you one of those masks that has like the many faces of Jana S Brown. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or you
Wasn't
could just
there a
like
He-Man
rotate
character that could do that though?
I
His
think
head just
so.
spun
Blockhead.
around and you would
Like Blockhead, I think
put
was his
different
name.
thing.
He-Man was really simple in their naming though. So
Yes,
but yeah,
they
you
were
could just
very straightforward.
you could like turn the mask and it like would reset and have like a vocal thing for each side. I don't know. I'm sure we can. Yeah, it'd get hot though. Like you'd be sweating.
Yeah, it'd get really, really warm. So we'll just stick with what we got.
All right. I mean, I guess we can just use your real face instead. So how have you been since the last time we had you on last week?
Busy because school just got started again. So when we're recording this, school just got started again, and I love it when school starts again because the summers are always so busy, and so many things you want to do and people you want to visit. And this year we had weddings and we had all sorts of things going on. And school starting again means that routine starts again, which means I'm finally able to get writing done in a more consistent fashion versus 15 minutes here and 10 minutes there and 3 minutes there. Now I can like sit at the computer for like an entire hour, and the only ones who come to bug me are the dogs and the kittens.
Yeah, I've been doing that with I bought the Dragon back. I had the old one and then I got a new computer and it didn't have a CD drive and they wouldn't let me like just download it again. They said, well, if you can't download it, you got to upgrade. And finally I'm like, I might just do that. And then I was going to see if I could just talk them into I've already got the 13. Can you just give me the upgrade with my code? And then I can get the new version cheaper. And they wouldn't. So I kind of let the lady, I wasn't very nice, but I kind of let her have it because I was just so frustrated. And I'm like, what's the good of your product if you don't honor it when people have old copies? Because you shouldn't, the forced upgrade is just annoying. And so she felt bad, so she gave it to me really cheaply. And so now what I'm going to do when I get time, I'm going to buy a nice little thumb drive and I'm going to download the program onto the thumb drive. So if I ever get a new computer, I don't have to worry about download links and I don't have to do this again.
Yes, because it's a pain.
It is. And then I'm going to put it in a Ziploc bag with the thumb drive and it's going to go in like a fireproof box somewhere.
Right so up there. It cannot be lost.
Right.
It's not cheap.
And if I put stuff in important places, I might find it in a decade. I'm like, oh, I was looking for that. When I was cleaning out last year, I was doing a deep clean and I found my Blockbuster card from the 90s. I'm like, that would have been helpful. Right.
That's vintage though.
Now it is. I should send it to a museum.
It might take it. And that makes me so sad.
Well, the electronic museums have the skip proof CD mans that we used to have, which by the way they didn't prevent skipping.
Oh, they totally skipped.
They totally skipped. They had one of those in a CD Walkman and the AM/FM radio Walkmans.
I owned all of those.
I did too. I used to listen to those when I would be running. I know it's gonna sound cheesy because I was getting myself ready for the military. So I'd listen to military running cadences, so I get used to running in step and talking.
Nice.
I wouldn't shout it out, but I'd kind of whisper talk to myself because one of the reasons you do that is it increases your lung capacity. Because you can talk and run, because when you're gassed, you can't talk. But so I still have my Walkman somewhere and a thing full of tapes. I listened to very angry heavy metal when I was in the 90s as a kid.
Nice.
So I still have all the Guns N' Roses. They used to be considered heavy metal, by the way, if you didn't know that.
I know. It makes me sad because I'm like, these were the bands that my parents were worried about when we were kids. And it's like, don't go listen to that stuff. It's terrible. And now comparatively, they're like classic rock. They're light and easy, and it's just like, since when did Ozzy Osbourne become the thing that's on the overhead music at the grocery store? It's just wrong.
Yeah, so it was like Guns N' Roses, Pearl Jam,
Nice.
Ugly Kid
Good name.
Joe. Yeah, but the problem is I don't know. It's weird because you don't hear music like that. Like for me, like part of the story of music is it's telling a story, like in a different form, sure, but there's a story. Nowadays, I feel like they're just throwing words together that rhyme and they're saying them lyrically. But like if you listen to what the song's about, I'm like, I have no freaking clue what we just spent 3 minutes listening to, and that's
Yeah,
kind of
and
disheartening.
the best musicians are the ones who are still doing that, and certain genres still do that. Country music still tends to tell a story, and Taylor
Folk
Swift, love her or hate her, she's actually pretty darn good at telling a story with her lyrics.
Yeah, you got a lot of the folk music will still do that.
Yep.
Some of the classic rock stuff will, although I don't know if there's as much new stuff in that genre. I know you're getting old though when you go to the doctor's appointment and you're in the elevator in the Muzak, because that's generally the old music because that's what they can afford to get the license for. When the Muzak in the grocery store music is the music you listened to when it was new as a kid, like holy
Yeah,
crap,
this
I'm
makes me
dead.
sad.
I'm a dead man. I'm old. Because like I
Whatever.
actually heard My Michelle on a grocery
Oh
store. Of course, they did
gosh.
a weird rendition of it. Like there was none of the emotional angst that Axl Rose could throw in a song.
No,
So,
it's the cover versions of it where yeah, they
and I've
think
heard
this is
cover bands that do really good. This was not that. This was like when we were on the USO tour and you'd hear these musicians come to the tour, and I'm like, bless their heart, they came to visit the troops, but I know why you're playing for free.
Yep.
You
Yep.
know, some of the musicians on the Muzak are kind of like that. Like, I know why this is what you're doing, but hey, like they're paying their bills, so you can't really hate on it.
Exactly. We all do things that, I've talked about it before. When I was a very young writer, I wrote for casinos and I wrote instructions for how to play all sorts of card games. And I had to write multiple versions of each one of them, which they were putting on screens or they were sending out as emails. And they had to have something that would pass a copyscape test over and over and over again. I wrote hundreds of those, and none of them were good. It was not good writing. It was just instructional stuff that would get past Copyscape to have lots and lots and lots of SEO. And I was an SEO slave for a long time, and it sure paid a lot of bills. Don't want to do it now, but it sure paid a lot of bills.
Does the SEO stuff still work?
SEO still works really well. A lot of it has changed. The way that you do it has changed. And to be honest, the vast majority of those jobs at this point have gone to AI because AI can do that kind of manipulation of terms faster and really quite efficiently. And then they can have people edit it and they can put it out, and that's faster than what someone like even a fast writer is going to be able to turn out for those kind of articles where it's like 250 words on this subject in 16 different ways. Go. It's really meant for a robot doing it.
Yeah, churn and burn kind of approach.
That's why
So
you hired cheap college students, because it was $2 per article. So the faster you wrote, the more of them you wrote, the more bills you could pay.
that's one way to do it. I mean, I wrote some stuff I'm not proud of for to pay for my first edit. So we've all been there. My mom might listen, so we're just going to move on. All right, now to the religion question, because this is the Blasters and Blades podcast. Are you ready for this?
I'm ready. I'm so ready.
All right, you've been on a lot, so I had to dig deep for these ones.
I
But
know. I love making you work.
Mars Attack, Galaxy Quest, or The Fifth Element?
Okay, this one's hard because I was on the episode for the Fifth Element, and I've really grown a huge appreciation there. But when you put it up against Galaxy Quest, I gotta go with Tim Allen because the Galaxy Quest just hits so many beautiful things, and it still makes me laugh every single time. So, Galaxy Quest.
Yeah, I've got ideas that I don't know if I had the idea before I watched Galaxy Quest because I watched it way late to the game. I found a lot of cult classics through this podcast just because you kind of want to know like the genre, where you came from, and then since I started writing too, like I started making a point of trying to go back to the classics. So I've been reading like some Heinlein, Paul Anderson,
Oh,
some of the other
nice.
classics. Who's the guy that did iRobot? Isaac Asimov. A few of the
Well,
others in their contemporaries. But so Galaxy Quest, I don't know if I found that before I got the idea, but I kind of think it'd be kind of cool. if an alien race came in, like, yeah, we really do need to do a Galaxy Quest podcast. Sorry, mind scrolls.
Oh, yeah.
But it's kind of like the idea of you kidnap a bunch of people because the aliens would be like reading our social media and think we have actual space fleets, because you got the Honor Harrington's got their own fan club. The Four Horsemen universe has their own fan club. Star Trek has its own. Star Wars has, I mean, that's Halo has its own, and all of them have naval elements, right?
Yep.
And so the idea is that we've got just in that alone, we've got 5 IPs that have fan clubs that call themselves Fleet. These aliens were like, man, we've got like all these space fleets. You're going to abduct all these fat nerds and be like, why can't you make my spaceship run?
Yeah, because we have no idea what we're actually. Well, the problem is that sometimes we do, because that was the point of Galaxy Quest, was that it actually was the nerds with the schematics and everything that saved the day. So
the ones that were arguing on the message boards, right? And that's the cool thing about Galaxy Quest. I really got to add that to the panel list. But the cool thing about the Galaxy Quest specifically was that, like, the actors didn't really have a lot of a high opinion, shall we say, of the fans. And so it was the fans that end up saving their life, the ones they didn't like, which I thought was a neat twist.
There's stories about Patrick Stewart and Jonathan Frakes calling Patrick Stewart and saying, you have to go watch this show. And Patrick Stewart saying, I don't want to watch this show. It's going to be awful, and it's going to make fun of everything we did and that kind of stuff. And he got talked into it, and he went and he said, this is absolutely brilliant, because it gives the nod to all of the different things, both to the campiness and to the heart that really was part of all of that IP. And so, and that's part of why I really love it, because it does give that nod to all the things. It recognizes how silly it is, but it also says, but there was always a heart there. There was a found family. There was all these things that make for great storytelling elements.
And I really like that they gave the nod to the red shirt with, I was crewman number 12 who died. And then he comes on, like, he goes to all the panels because that was the highlight of his acting career, which is kind of sad if you think about it. But there are actors that's their gig. Like, they do the con circuit now because their acting dried up, but they had that one bit part in the one big show, and now they can go and talk about like what it was like behind the scenes with all the really famous people. And hey, I mean, if you can make a living at it, good for them. Like, I'm not casting shade on them or anything, but like, they had that one character in there. It was just hilarious. And he's like, wait a minute, if we do this for real, I'm going to be the one that dies.
Yeah.
They're going
to kill Guy. Yeah. Poor guy.
Yeah, that was hilarious. I really wish that they had given you a part 2. There are talks of doing a part 2 now, but it's been so long. Like, how do you explain the intervening years? The actors they've aged, obviously.
Because we can't stop that. So they'd have to come up with some kind of next generation spin on it. But I think you could do clever things with it and still give that kind of homage.
Yeah, or we need to start an academy. We abduct the old timers, they can train the new people and grab a few new crew, kind of thing. So you go for the Starfleet Academy vibe, because that obviously is campy too. And you can mock Wesley Crusher again, because everybody loves to mock Wesley Crusher.
It's what we do. That's true.
What we do. All right, because we're polytheistic here at the Blaster Blade podcast, Dragonheart, Aragon, or Dragon Slayer?
Okay, I have to stick with Dragonheart because that's my man, Sean Connery. And that voice, there's a lot of things a woman would do for that voice. So that's my favorite.
Yeah, Sean Connery was a good one as well. For as far as acting, like, he never took himself too seriously that he was rude to fans.
Right. Yeah. He had a good nod for knowing that some of what he did was absolutely ridiculous. I mean, James Bond you can't get much campier than especially some of the early James Bond, but he played it and went with it, and he's a lot of people's he's my James Bond.
So they did an interview with him once, because my mom has showed this to me a dozen times because she likes it. And they asked him, he's like, you're a big established author now. You can pick and choose the parts you take, and yet you'll still do the campy B movies as well. And it was because acting is my job, and when I'm not working, I could get myself in trouble. And something along the lines of what he said, something effective, idleness is the devil's playground, whatever that quote is,
Yes.
And he was like,
idle
hands, because I don't know if he's religious, but he's basically like, if I've got free time, I can get myself in trouble. I'm an actor. Acting is my job. So I'll take what's, in the off season, if there's something there, why not? Which I'm sure helped some of these small bit movies get more prominence than they might have otherwise. kind of paying
Oh,
it forward
certainly.
for the new authors too, new actors. But I like that kind of approach because some of them, they start to take themselves too seriously. Like they buy
Yeah.
their own press.
Mm-hmm.
And that's have you seen what's that? We never go full. Who of course he uses the R word, which we can't say anymore. But the one where the white plays the black guy, playing the white guy. It was it's Tropical Thunder. Tropical Thunder. There we go.
Oh, yeah,
Uh,
that was a weird show.
it was, but that was one of the bits about it was you can't take yourself too seriously. Never go full idiot.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
Never go full
and,
idiot.
and some of them do in the modern. Well, not even modern Hollywood, just Hollywood in general.
Mm-hmm.
Tropical Thunder is another good comedy that, like Blazing Saddles, I don't think you could make it nowadays.
No, neither one of those would be allowed by any stretch of a spectral imagination. Even though some of the things they did were absolutely brilliant and brilliant commentaries on exactly the reasons that they couldn't get made now. But yeah, they would be hard to ever make again.
But oh man, product of their time. Like I still laugh at those. A lot of those older like campy '90s comedies, like Robin Hood Men in Tights. Some of the jokes there, like you couldn't make that again. Like,
but it was
like
so funny.
some of the bits, they're so subtle, but they're also so crude that you can kind of laugh at it at two levels. And it does kind of objectify women, but that was the joke. And so you couldn't probably make those nowadays, but like, oh my God, we're losing so much of comedy because we're too sensitive.
That's a lot of comics have commented on that too, that, you get to the point that it's like, well, I'm not allowed to make a joke about anything because somebody's going to get upset. And so what is humor and what is comedy at that point when we're not allowed to poke fun at ourselves? And that's really where a lot of that is. It's reflective humor, because you look at your lives, you look at the lives of the people around you, and you go, this actually is pretty darn funny, but people take it seriously and then you get canceled. So it's a rough crowd.
We're the generation that grew up on Beavis and Butthead and what
Ren
was
and
it?
Stimpy
Ren and Stimpy, South Park. You know what I mean? Like you can't.
We were rude to each other all the time because that's how you knew that you loved somebody, is that if you weren't harassing them, you probably didn't like them all that much. The people that you liked, you harass them, and then when somebody else harasses them, then you punch them in the face, because no one's allowed to harass your friend except you. And that is a skill that is
kind of
not
the
understood.
military. Like when they're nice to me, I'm like, wait, did I make you mad?
Yeah.
Like, when they're not busting my balls when I run into my army buddies. Most of those, unfortunately, are friends I made after I was out because, not a lot of the other ones are alive. But like when I run into them, even still as civilians, like if they're nice to me, I'm like, wait a minute, did I make you mad? Like, did I do something? I forget your birthday? I don't know. Come on, you got to give me a
what's going on here?
And I know people don't understand that because it's on the outside, like it just seems mean. But like, I don't know. It just is how we are. And I don't know how much of that's because we grew up before the world was as sensitive. How much of that's an army thing? I couldn't tell you.
All of the above.
Yeah, probably.
D, all of the above.
Absolutely. All of the above. All right. You've been on the show a lot. So you've answered a lot about your favorite dinosaurs, your favorite zoo animals. And at this point, we'd be going for the top 10 instead, because you've already done this like at least a dozen times. So I'm going to mix it up for you. Given the topic of your book today, what's your favorite monster?
See, that's a hard one because there's so many really, really great monsters to deal with. Within fantasy, I would probably lean pretty hard into griffins. I like the griffin. I like that it's got some of the same coolness as dragons, but it's not as often done. I like the intelligence there. I like the flight. So I do like a really good griffin. In urban fantasy, I'm a werewolf kind of girl. I like working with the were creatures, but griffins are my thing.
I sent me like one person sent me it was from a fan thing. Like it was just some student's blog, but this big guy was harassing women. So there's a witch in the bar because there's always a witch when you're acting stupid, all the way back to Beauty and the Beast. And so she cursed him, turns him into a were, but he turns into a were poodle because he was this big macho biker dude. And then when he gets like when he shifts, instead of being fierce, he's just like yep, 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 which I think is hilarious. Yeah, I thought it was hilarious. Like, I don't know. I've always liked some of the like subverting expectations, but in a funny way. I'm all for if it feels like stuck in the box. Like even that one, you know, to go from like the macho guy to like a female poodle would have still been funny and not felt like it was checking a box because it was all about the inverse of the what he was portraying to people. So it was like, you know, comeuppance kind of thing, but it was so hilarious. I actually sent the guy that wrote it an email and I was like, this is really good. You could professionally sell this, clean it up, and I'll buy your first professional customer because it was hilarious. I mean, like obviously there were formatting and grammar issues, but it was so good I didn't care.
Which is exactly what you want.
Yeah, he took step one. He unpublished it from online, and he's working with, I guess his mom, he said, was an English teacher. So he's working with her for first draft. And so I gave an open invitation. I will stop what I am writing, and I will do a quick editing pass for him and send him to people I know because it was just that good.
Oh, but I mean, totally read that.
Yeah, it was just hilarious because like every time the biker guy started getting grown, like the people around him that knew were like, really, you little poodle?
Yeah. Are you really that threatening? No, you're not.
So I could have, like, I don't know, like that's the cool thing about where everyone thinks like the dire wolf-sized wolves, which, you know, but it's kind of cool when you go to other animals, even in the canine family, that it can be kind of fun. Like the annoying little pug, like same effect, right? But everyone goes to these like massive apex predators. I'm like,
well, because it makes sense that's what if you were magically going to shift yourself into something, you would probably go birds of prey, apex predators, things that could help to protect you and your tribe and that kind of thing. That's where the folklore of it comes in. But once we get into urban fantasy, there's just so many possibilities. But I'll also say some of them I've read, they go a little bit far trying to be unique. I read one that was about a man who turned into a were-lemming. And I'm sorry, but it just didn't work for me because it was just like, you turn into a what? Why? And no. So there's interesting possibilities. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, I mean, if an animal exists, it makes sense that there could be a shifter version of it. But sometimes the more obscure it is, it's just like, I mean, really? Oh, okay. I mean, if that's the ball you want to play, but maybe there were other cool options you could have explored. I try to keep it to the known animals. Like if I have to do research on the animal to read your book, probably not gonna. Like at least with the base animals that you know at a zoo kind of thing.
Yeah, they're common enough that you can go. Someone turns into a werebuffalo. All right, I'm there. That you get ginormous and you stomp on people. All righty then.
I mean, I'd be down for a were-woolly mammoth even.
Oh yeah.
Or anything that's a cryptid. Be like, oh, that's why people are citing it because they're shifters.
Mm-hmm.
That would work for me. But I mean, I think you get to a point where you hit ad infinity with the absurdity of it all. I guess ad absurdity if you wanted to try to make it sound Latin.
Yeah, and at a certain point, it's like, nah, let's get back. Let's get back to things that are a little bit more run of the mill.
I don't know. I guess for me,
story.
For me, it's always gone back to the Belgariad where the grandfather shifts into a wolf. Now, he's not technically a werewolf. He's just shifting shape because he can shift into everything. Whereas werewolves kind of, it's the body, the soul of the animal is there too. I think that's the difference between shifters and were animals. But like once I saw, oh, you could be a wolf. That's just always like, because I've always liked dogs over cats, right? So like to me, it's just kind of cool. But
it is the classic, the classic big shifter, and because we're in spooky season, it's that vampire shifter werewolf thing that you got with the classic movies, because they didn't have, it wasn't the were shifter. It's always the werewolf. It's that is your classic monster movie.
And I want to get Joe Vasicek on to talk about this on his. No, it's not Joe Vasicek that did it. It's J.D. Sawyer who did the podcast Everyday Novelist, and he actually talked about like marketing trends as various things happen in the world. You can almost predict which subgenres are going to rise to the top because he's like with monsters, it rotates between zombies and the werewolves and the vampires and all these other things. He's like you can almost predict based on what's going on in the world what's going to be popular, which is why on his thing he's like write it all because eventually it'll rotate back and you'll be positioned to hit the wave.
But it tends to be cyclical.
but it's tied to the psychology of what's going on in the world. So how you feel. So for instance, when World War III looks like it's on the horizon, suddenly not as many people want to read middle sci-fi. They want space opera or fantasy, and it's not that they don't want combat. They just don't want it to be marketed as pure military,
right?
Because it's less about wish fulfillment now and be like, crap, that might be my future.
Yeah.
So I the same applies to monsters, which all of that's fascinating because people fascinate the hell out of me. But
well, Barnes & Noble just released an article that was called "Wherefore Art Thou, Bella," where they were talking about that they're starting to see a rise in reader popularity with vampires again, with Twilight-style fiction, the a little bit less graphic, but the romantic vampire thing. And that is always in indies. There's always been a market for all of these different monsters, but to see it starting to rise again in traditional publishing is an interesting way to go.
And for those of you, because we try to target our audience as listeners, we try to target listeners who are just lovers of books and readers, not other authors. But one of the reasons that there's a difference for those of you who don't know between trad pub and indie, everyone's like, oh, they're snobby. Really what it comes down to is they've got a lot of overhead because of their expenses, because they're in New York, which is expensive. Even Baen has a lot of overhead because they got permanent staff, they got facilities to maintain. So taking out any like malice on the part of anybody, just looking at it raw numbers, they have to sell way more copies to break even than you and I would as indie, because we've got our overhead is the house we're already living in. So check that off the box. You've literally got your editing, your cover, and maybe if you do marketing. So like it's not unheard of for less than 1,000 copies sold, you could break even. That's the standard, I would say. Unless you go nuts on the advertising. And sometimes you can go nuts and lose your shirt advertising. That's why be cautious. But as a general rule, like things that are selling like wild cakes for indie authors, because our overhead is lower, wouldn't move the needle for trad pub, which is why, that's why indie was so popular with middle sci-fi, because they would have said there's no money in it for us. Obviously Baen proved them wrong, but at the time that was their thinking. It's not that there weren't readers, there just weren't enough readers.
Yeah, it's niche markets versus a really, really broad general audience. And trad is always looking for what's going to be the biggest one, because they take a lot of time. And again, that's because they put out so many books in a year with all that overhead, with all the scheduling, trying to work in their old faithful kind of authors, new debuts, that they're just juggling so much that they can't follow trends in the way we can, and they can't serve a niche market in the same way. So they're watching for what rises through indie, what's becoming less niche, and then you see they're starting to pick it up. So it's an interesting, it used to be that we were following trad, and now we're seeing a lot of traditional stuff that follows the indie stuff that picks up and finds a broader market than what they really believe is niche. So it's just an interesting balance. They just do different things.
Well, let's be honest, all authors that aren't romance authors following what romance authors do, because that's where all the groundbreaking stuff is happening.
It's true.
But it's also like, I think somebody broke it down as like 70% of all books sold are romance novels. Like that's the largest market.
It's always number one. They're a $3 billion business all by themselves.
Not just number one by significant margins.
Yep.
The last time I saw the stats broken out, it was literally like 70% of all books sold were romance novels. And then everything else was all the other genres fighting for book space.
For pieces.
Yeah. Although the cool thing is once you start writing is now when I go to Barnes & Noble, because I still try to go in the proper like brick and mortar bookstore with the kid to get that experience of browsing the shelves, do the same thing at the library. It's weird because I'm like, I know that guy, just because of the podcast. Funny? Yeah. They went and be like, oh, I wonder who these cool people that write books are. And I'm like, oh yeah, it's Bob. He's a jerk. It's a weird thing, but it's not even just because I write, because there are plenty of people who do podcasts like this that aren't writers. They're just lovers of things, right? Like, and so it's the interconnectedness that social media gives you that kind of changes the game. I imagine that's changing marketing too, but it's just funny to me now that I can go to a bookstore and be like, oh, I know that guy.
Yeah, I've met that person, and I had drinks with that person. Yeah, it's they were at my conference. Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. And because this is the Blasters and Blades, although we are recording this in the beginning of September, where it is still feeling like it is the summer, we will be playing this for you, dear listener, as the last episode before the spooky season starts for our podcast that we do every year to honor Stabby Stab, where we talk all things horror, which she loves. She loves to read about people dying. I don't know what that says about her. Maybe we should do a mental wellness check, but it is what it is. And so as that, when we ask you this question, keep in mind you're answering for what applies to the spooky season. So because we are civilized human beings here at the Blasters and Blades podcast, we are no longer knuckle dragging troglodytes. Coffee or tea, and how do you take it? Obviously, you don't drink coffee or tea for reasons you have, but
I don't. My caffeine of choice is Diet Dr. Pepper. I'm very fond of it, particularly with limes and coconut in it. And yes, you can sing the whole song that goes with that. But for spooky
I was
season,
singing it in my head.
I know. I like a good cider, so I like apple cider. I like plum cider, but those nice mulling spices, and you just get everything going. I will always drink hot cocoa, especially peppermint hot cocoa, once the temperature changes. And we're on that verge. It's what my husband calls when you step outside and it smells like football. And it's around here, you have to get a really good frost. And once you get that couple days of a really hard frost, you step outside and it smells like football. And that's when you have to start drinking the hot chocolate and the
It
apple
smells
cider.
like football.
So that's what happens. It smells like football. And we're not quite there yet. We're still just a little bit too warm. We haven't had a first freeze yet. Our nights are still only going down to 65. So we're not quite there, but it's coming. We can feel it. In the next couple of weeks, we're going to get a couple of nights where it'll freeze, and then it'll smell like football, and that means that it's fall.
So do you do the plum? Is that spiced or mulled? And what's the difference?
So usually, well, there's a couple of things. With mulled, for some people, the definition of mulled means that they add a wine to it or some other kind of a spirit. But mulled also means that it soaks. So sometimes when we say apple spice, it just means people have sprinkled cinnamon on it and away they go. When it's mulled, it sits in those spices and it lets those spices from the whole. So whole sticks of cinnamon, not cumin. Cumin would be really bad. Cinnamon and cloves and allspice and all those really good things, and you put them in and you just let them go, and they sit in a slow cooker and they just go all day and put that essence into there for your essential oils. That's usually where you get a mulled. And the spiced is we've just added, apple pumpkin spice to it, and away we go. Both good, but if you can really mull it all day and let it just really take that essence out of things, it's better.
So for me, when I was little and we were doing scouting every year, we'd go to the Francis Land House, which is in Virginia Beach. It's a historic site. They've got they would have people in period clothing talking about living in like the 1600s. They would have events where you'd like hit a wagon wheel type deal, and you'd hit it with a stick and try to keep it going, which was a game the kids played back then. I can't remember the name of that game. Some of the other like top games where you got the spinning top, which is the yarn tool, but they're playing it like to spin it as a game. They had an actual functioning garden that would have supplied the house, and you tour the house, and they would always sell, because this popular for those tours was in the fall, they would sell spiced apple cider. So every time I think of fall, I remember being in that place, smelling the spiced apple cider, and the lady with the little white bonnet and the period clothing trying to sell it to you. And I don't like the way it tastes. It smells so good. I wish I liked the way it tastes. I've heard people say that about coffee to them. But like, I love the way spiced apple cider smells. And so for me, like, that's always the smell of fall.
Yep.
And I know people like I said, people have said that about coffee. I really understand when they say that, because I feel the same way about the cider. And so when you read some of the shifter stuff, since we were talking paranormal and urban fantasy, where they talk about, my fated mate, and I smell them as somehow different than just, human, like there's that special. And so for me, if I was ever going to throw one in there, I'm like, definitely spiced apple cider, because that's just so unique. Like, it just triggers all my memories of childhood of something good. So I went on a lot of, before I was old enough for Boy Scouts, my older sister was in Girl Scouts, and I think my younger sister was too, because Girl Scouts started younger. So that's what they call the tag along. That's what they named their cookie after, was the siblings that were not old enough to join, but got blood along anyway. And so for me, like, I remember like just running around like an idiot while the girls did whatever they were doing, chasing a stick. I mean, I could have been playing fetch like a dog for all I care. Like, it was just, they would throw it, we'd go to catch it, right? Boys are easy. What can I say? I mean, basically, fetch. But so for me, that's always been like, I don't know why, but I still remember that. And so it's always fall for me, is spiced apple cider.
Oh yeah,
So
that's fantastic. It's the beginning of baking season for me, and I take my baking season very, very seriously. And so my husband makes homemade pumpkin pie spice for me. And so it's grinding down and toasting all of those different things, the cinnamon and the cloves and the allspice and ginger and that kind of thing. And so he toasts it all up and grinds it down, and he makes me this ginormous container full. And by the time that we get to February, it'll be empty because I use it
so
in so many different things that I bake, and it's such a lovely thing, which reminds me I need to tell him that I need another batch made.
you get a kick out of this. So you sent us last Christmas. You sent us fudge, caramel fudge, and like the peppermint thing.
Yep.
And I shared it obviously because your instructions were share or else, and I figured you had spies, so I did. I shared it with my parents, and while we were eating it, my dad's like, "This is really good," because he saw the as we opened the package. Obviously, it said Jana on it. He goes, "Is she single?" I'm like, "No." He's like, "Or is she single? You should marry her." I'm like, "No, her husband might object." He goes, "Jr, it's 2023. Make it happen. I want some more."
Talk to me at Christmas. We'll make that happen for him.
I'm like, I mean, I guess there's a whole genre of books based on that theme, but I'm pretty
Yeah, no,
sure her husband might have some words about that.
no. He
I'm like,
we don't share, so
how about we just buy the chocolate and call it a day?
we'll just we have a friends and family deal. It'll be fine.
Right. All right. All right. So now that we got that out of the way, we've got you here to talk about your books. But before we do that, we're going to air that beautiful commercial, and then we're going to dive right in and spend the rest of this episode about the War of the Lich. Lich? I don't know. The War of something.
Lich. The
Lich. There we go.
Lich. Roll that beautiful bean footage.
Are you searching for an epic new fantasy book to read? Well, look no further. Try out Spring for Spears, where the fate of the Wolf Riders falls on an outcast. Astrid would give anything to be one of the Ulfsark, the fearless warriors who ride giant Amarak wolves. Like her ancestors, she yearns for the soul-deep bond with a wolf, the connection, the union, a chance to prove her worth and honor her mother's legacy. Yet, she's never heard the wolf song, and with each passing year, it's likely she never will. Except Astrid refuses to accept her fate. Then, an encounter with a nature spirit and a foreign princess dashes her last hope and changes everything. Will Astrid save a fragile peace and embrace her destiny? Or will her dreams of the wolf song fade to distant lands? Join Astrid and friends on a thrilling new fantasy adventure in A Spring for Spears, the first novel in the Wolf Song saga, a series by best-selling, award-winning authors Katie Cross and Derek Allen Sidaway.
All right, now that we got that out of the way, I realized something as I was listening to this commercial. We've had you on so often, but never about just one of your books. It's always been panels and topics.
Yep.
So you've never told us your origin story. So how did you get into both loving the books and then deciding, you know what, I'm going to try this myself? I don't think you've ever told us.
This is a old origin story. So I'm one of those people that grew up listening to stories. You talked about folk stories and things like that, and I grew up on a farm where we would go and we would listen to my grandparents, and they would tell us all these stories. And some of them were stories that were folk tales and things like that, and others of them were the family stories. We got a lot of the ancestor stories and that kind of thing. So I always loved story. And then I got into school and started learning about, reading and writing, all that kind of thing. And I read and read and read and was a very accomplished reader very early. And by the time that I was about 8 years old, I knew that the two things I really wanted out of life is I wanted to be a mom. I thought that having kids was just a wonderful thing. And I wanted to write stories for other people. And I knew that at that point. And I knew that those two things would work together because you can write when the kids are asleep. And I had this whole plan, and 8-year-old me was very, very starry-eyed because that is not the way it works. Trying to write with kids is much, much harder than 8-year-old me ever thought that it would be. So that's when I started doing things. I finished my first novel when I was 13. I sent it to Tor Books when I was 14 because I was again very starry-eyed, and I got the nicest rejection letter that I own. And I have a very, very large box full of rejection letters. And that's not even printing off the electronic ones, but we all go through that. And I sent it in, and Peter Doherty was the editor at the time, and I got a hand-signed letter back from him that basically said, nice going, kid, keep writing. We can't accept this now. It is a little bit derivative, and that's because I had recently read Lord of the Rings, and there was a lot of Lord of the Rings that had eked its way into that first novel, which happens for a lot of us that go into fantasy is we read great books like Lord of the Rings, and our very first book often has a lot of ties back to the things that we've read. But he was very, very encouraging and said, keep going, turn things back in, all that kind of stuff. And so I kept writing. And when I was in college, I took the editing path. So I pursued editing and publication, and that was my field of study. And as part of that, I went to work as an editor at Life, the Universe, and Everything, which is the magazine of science fiction and fantasy at Brigham Young University. Now it's just called Leading Edge. They took all the other cool stuff out, but it used to be much longer than that. And within the first 2 months, I was made their executive secretary, which means that I was in charge of organizing everybody's crap. So I opened all of the mail that came because back then it was paper and self-addressed stamped envelopes. I was the first reader, so I read everything. And if it didn't comply with all of our rules, I was the first rejector. So I would form reject things and say, no, we're not even going to look at this. I got things that had perfume on them. Those got form rejected. I got one that was written in either lip liner or eyebrow pencil. Not sure which. It was very, very smudged. It might have been the most beautiful poem ever. I don't know because it was makeup smudge all over the paper. That was a form rejection. Things like that. So that's really where I started working as an editor and working really seriously as a writer. And from then, every job that I've had has had a really big writing element to it. Whether it's been technical writing, I wrote for the local newspaper, I wrote for the Deseret News, and did journalism with them. I wrote game reviews, so there's a couple of sites out there that you can still find my reviews of, play Salmon Max, and then write a review about why people would want to play this game. Like I said, I wrote for a lot of stuff in college, and then on the side, I was always writing books and practicing writing books, practicing, sending them out, getting rejection letters, all those kinds of neat things. Um, and that went on for a long, long time. And then self-publishing hit, and it really started to become a thing that you could get your own work out and that you could start making these decisions. And a good friend of mine, Melissa McShane, who's been on the show, she wrote several books, and we were all in the same Dungeons and Dragons group. And so there were several of us who were writing, and we were kind of working as a writers group. And she put her first book out and went, this was really lots easier than I thought it would be. More people ought to try to do that. And so at that point, I had a book that I was almost finished with, and my grandmother was towards the end of her life, and she wanted to make sure that I had published something before she died. And so that first book, Desert Rains, I wrote during the summer, and I released it in October, and my grandmother passed away 10 days later. And since that point, I've written 17 books under 3 different pen names, and I've been in a lot of anthologies. I work with anthologies. I'm putting together my own. I work as an editor. I've worked as a senior editor. So everything has been writing all the way from very, very early on, writing and storytelling. It's what I love. It's what I do. And then I also work now as a coach and a mentor for other authors because I want to help them get more of their stuff out. So when I'm not writing my own stuff, I'm reading and helping other people with theirs. And my daughter has started writing a book, and it's very, very cute. She's only 11, so it's the book that 11-year-old writes. But my first one was at 13, and I knew what that was. So I'm just proud of her that she's sitting down and putting down words and putting together her ideas for others. So there you go. There's the origin story. No flapping capes, but it does, it does have a certain rhythm to it.
That's cool though. I get the love of family stories because that's kind of how the stories of people are how I got into loving history. I was really disappointed when we started doing our genealogy works that I didn't have any like cattle thieves or like I don't know something cool like highwaymen because there's a really cool song called The Highwaymen and I'm like I don't got any of those in my family. I feel disappointed.
Aw.
I'm like, come on, ancestors, you didn't behave badly enough for me. So, all right.
Yeah.
So.
I have an ancestor who told off the Native Americans because they wanted to they wanted the ducks that she had killed, and they gestured at her ducks, and she pulled out a shotgun and was like, you come near my ducks and I'm gonna shoot you. And they decided to go somewhere else. They were very respectful of her thereafter.
So
like,
when I
yep,
was
added.
deployed to Iraq in the early war, they were still trying to win the hearts and minds was the approach. And I
All
remember
right.
after we got this lecture from the colonel about all the good things we're going to do, and how many of us will probably die in doing that because we're not proactive. They didn't say that. That was the undertone, the subtext, as we like to call it. And so as
Right.
soon as all the officers left, our platoon sergeant, who's this like grizzled old NCO that literally fought in Vietnam, he did his time, he got out, and then he hit that epiphany most of us hit right around 40, but like, if I'd stayed in, I'd be retiring right now and getting that check every month. So then he went into the guard and he stayed another 20. So he was putting in his retirement in 2003, and they're like, no, Sarge, you're not done. We got one more rodeo for you. Because I was in the early war, I was at that phase where they were still a few people in the Guardian Reserve that were non-vets in. I mean, it's very rare. And there were some of the contractors that were. So he pulled us aside and he goes, I'm going to tell you what, you grab them by the balls and the hearts and mind will follow. And that was some of the best advice when it comes to that kind of stuff I've ever heard. I try to put that line in a book. I take that approach to a lot of things. But all right. So now that we've talked about the cool stuff about our dead people who can't argue with us, we're going to talk about the War of the Lich. There we go. This gets harder to get pronunciation when you're hard of hearing. One too many concussions, I guess. I got the Ring of Freedom called tinnitus, or tinnitus, however you say that. It messes with pronunciation. It's why I can't do my own audiobooks, because I'd mess it all up. But obviously, what would you say? And we're going to use like the PG rating, the movie rating, because I think everyone's familiar with that. What would you say the appropriate age range for this books before we dive into the series? What would you say that would be?
PG-13. There's a little bit of cussing in this, that, and the other, and there's a lot of fantasy violence. So it's probably PG-13. We read it to my daughter, who is 11, and she handled it just fine, but my husband also jumped over a couple of sections.
That's fair. I'm just zooming in because we're talking about the series, because you got 3 out and another one, 4 will be coming out soon.
Nope. 3 is it. It's a tight trilogy after a very classic fantasy kind of structure. And then so the 4th thing that is coming out will be a prequel that I'll use for newsletters and all that kind of stuff. So, and that's because my mother wanted to know what happened before, because the series picks up 100 years after everything went absolutely utterly wrong, and society and the world as they knew it was all destroyed, except for little pockets here and there. And they've spent the last 100 years kind of building back up, but they can never really get a decent foothold as far as the people of the land. And so Mom wants to know, well, what happened way back then? Because we get all these hints, but she wants the actual story. And so that's the prequel. I'll be writing that for her.
So we couldn't convince you to write a Bane trilogy then, where it's like 5 to 7 books?
One of these days. That's probably the next one. The urban fantasy I'm working on will be at least 5, and it might be as long as 7.
See, I know,
that'll come.
I envy people that can keep their story arc shorter. Like the idea of being able to just write a trilogy, I'm like, I don't know how you do it. But then again, people that ask, how do you get the ideas? I'm like, no. How do you make them stop?
I'm there.
But like I couldn't take, like, I have never written a short story that I couldn't plan a series for, in a whole universe that has like 12 follow-on series too. Like the idea of scaling down is what I have problems with, not scaling up. So when you, like, in my writing accountability group, we check in. Some of the guys are trying to transition from, I'm doing short stories for submissions because they're going to trad pub art, so they want to get in the anthologies, to get professional works out to prove that they can finish things and all that. And I'm like, and now, like, how do you transition from that to long form? I'm like, how do you only write short and not have like 100-book art? That's what I want to know. Make the idea stop for just 5 minutes.
Oh, I'm right there. I have a whole folder that is ideas that might have legs, and I scribble down the basic idea, the first about 5,000 words, and shove it in the folder, because otherwise I won't get anything done. And so I've had to learn how to focus around the idea fairy, and sometimes I do it better than others. But so this one is a tight 3-book trilogy. There is potential for some spin-off stuff, but this is where we're starting.
Okay. I know for me, I get those weird ideas out in short stories. That's partly why I do all the anthologies that I do. Although I had to come to the epiphany that just because I publish an anthology doesn't mean I have to have a story in it. Because like when we did the cyberpunk one, I got no cyberpunk story in me. I just did it as a favor for a friend who wanted somebody to host it. I'm like, nope, I'm not doing it. So that was kind of hard go because I'm like, but it's got my name on it. I need to put a story in there.
There's that feeling, but sometimes it's better to say, no, I'm just going to be the one that fashions this, and I don't have to have something in there.
Absolutely. All right. So we've talked about that it's probably PG-13. So it's appropriate for kids, which we have some parents that listen and they want to know, hey, can I let my kids read this book? And then parents with kids who don't care if their kids read the book want to know, if I'm listening to the audiobook in the car, is this one I have to stop listening to when I pick the kids up from the carpool? Because I have some of those books I listen to. I'm like, okay, kids in, stop. Let's put the news on or something.
There's mention of things like brothels, which for my 11-year-old, it went right over her head what that was. And my husband's over there snickering because he's like, yeah, I know exactly where Annual's going carousing, but she didn't get it. We don't get detailed, but these guys, they have normal lives, and so there's drinking and there's carousing and some of this, that, and the other going on, but none of it's detailed to where you're going to have to quick switch it off or explain something to the kid.
Yeah, that's the weird part, because then the kid's like, this sounds interesting. What's going to happen next? And I'm like, we don't know. It's just one of the mysteries of the world.
Mystery. Things happened, and yeah, away we go.
I never realized that until like how much certain things just come out. I worked at a military high school, middle school when I was between deployments because I didn't have enough time to go back to do schoolwork after the second one. So it's like, and I remember going there, and when I got called in to talk to, because it's military high school, middle school, and I got stuck with the middle school kids because nobody wanted the middle school kids. So as the F and new guy, I got stuck with the middle school kids, and I got called in the commandant's office, which is basically the guy that handles the military side, and then they got the president that handles the academics and the school stuff. And he's like, Sergeant Handley, is there a reason your kids are using these expressions that come strictly from the Army, like take your head out of your backside kind of thing? And I'm like, oh, kids repeat what we say. And that was kind of the epiphany for me that I had when I was like 25 I've been younger than 25, but anyway, like, so I know that when I listen to books, I have to consider, if they repeat this in school, am I going to get a call from the teacher? And so like it's always nice to set those standards for the parents that listen.
Yes.
Because like some of the podcasts I like about writing, even the guy's got a potty mouth, and while I don't care, I don't want my kids repeating that. So like another podcast I don't listen to while he's in the car. That's strictly while I'm walking on my my daily trip around the lake. But okay. So it's family friendly. That part's good. Older kids. What would you say the elevator pitch for this series, like the sales pitch, if you were going to try to be succinct?
So the sales pitch on it is that a journeyman of the god of death finds the last healer in the world, and he has to take her to solve the problem of the Lich. They either can work together and destroy the Lich, or their homeland is going to fall and it will be the end of everything. So it's kind of the two of them, and it ends up being the two of them with a lot of friends, a lot of found family, that kind of thing, and they do this together. It is very classic kind of epic fantasy, quest fantasy, but he found the very last healer in the world, and now he's got to figure out what to do about that.
Okay. And so is this an adventure story? Is it a romance novel? Like, how would you classify this adventure?
It's an adventure story. It is quest fiction, so you end up with the setup here is that 100 years ago, a great lich rose, and liches are necromancers. They control the dead. They can bring the dead back to life and that kind of thing. And he destroyed the pantheon of gods at the time, except for the god of death, who was able to resist him. And so now with all these people that they killed, he brings them back, and every night the dead arise, and they go and they hunt the living, and they kill more, and they add to their numbers. And the only way to make the undead stay dead is if they're killed with a divine weapon, which has to be the followers of the god of death, because he's the only god that's still around, or if they are burned with divine fire. So otherwise, you can scatter the bones, you can do all those kinds of neat things, and it'll work temporarily, but they will reform. The magic will eventually reform them, and they will go back to pounding on your cities and taking them apart and killing anybody they can get their mitts on. So this is the land that they've been living in. This is the way things have just been for the last 100 years, and people are eking out an existence, but it's a tough existence because if you get caught out, you're in big trouble. And so the Knights of Asephin are the followers of the god of death, and the god of death has an innate huge problem with the undead because he's the god of death. Once things have been laid to death, they should stay that way. So he's got problems with somebody else bringing things back to life. And his knights are his followers, and they are knights errant all the time. They come home to the temples for a brief period of time, and then they're back out there. So they're basically paladins of death, putting the undead back to rest and keeping it that way. So that's kind of the background that you come into. And then our hero, Darian, is a young journeyman. He hasn't yet taken all of his oaths, but his mother is high in the ranks of the knights, and he knows that that's what he wants to do. And the convoy he's with is getting something precious. He doesn't know exactly what it is, except that it is thrust into his hands when they fall under attack, and he's told to run for it. And that's where our story opens, is with him running down a mountain, being chased by the undead, knowing that he is the last one in his convoy alive, and he's got to get from where he is back to the high temple. And that's when he very literally stumbles over a cliff and lands in front of the cave of the only healer in the entire world. And then she saves him. So you get this adventure fiction going on. There's a very, very low and slow burn romance. So it's definitely there, but it's very cute, and it's very, like I say, it's very, very subtle. It's slow burn right up until the end. I think there's one, maybe two kisses in the entire thing. So, for those who don't want heavy romance, it's there because people have relationships, but it's pretty slow burn all the way through. So yeah, so it's fun to write. I think that it's fun to read. I have a good time going back and rereading it. So, the assumption is there that it's still fun. And lots of getting to smush things. My boys are both action adventure guys, and my older boy in particular really, really likes military stuff. He would have, I know I'm going to speak blasphemy here, but he would have gone into the Air Force if he hadn't been so tall and he hadn't ripped out his ankle. Those were the two things that kept him from. He wanted to be a fighter pilot, but he ended up being 6'3", and it's hard to be a fighter pilot when you're 6'3". You don't fit. So he
That
was
is,
my
God.
he was my military advisor. So he would read the combat scenes and read the setup of how the brethren worked and all that kind of stuff, and tell me when I was getting it wrong.
I mean, when people say that they would have joined butt and they insert physical issue, which literally prevented them, I don't hold any well. I kind of smirk at the ones like, oh yeah, but I would have beat up my drill sergeant. But that's a whole other class of people. So before we get too deeply, I'm going to throw that cover up. So what is the story of this art? How did you come up with the images you put on the screen? Because I like the mace, the spear, and I don't know what the third one is, but like, how did you pick the images?
So the stories were mostly written by the time that I got that art. And this came from a great gal, RJ Creatives, over on Facebook, and she had a sale going on and was doing trilogies for like $500, which for indie artists, that's an amazing thing that I could get all three of my books for $500. And so weaponry is really, really important in the story. Classically, when you play D&D and that kind of stuff, spears and swords, edged weapons only do partial damage to the undead, because if you're stabbing a skeleton, it kind of just goes through. There's no vital organs to stab. So all of the knights carry bludgeoning weapons, and axes, which kind of work as both a slashing and a bludgeoning weapon. So I had to go through, and I like medieval weaponry. I did SCA medieval recreation for 7 years, and until my body wouldn't let me do it anymore. So coming up with the weaponry was really important. And the maces, those are Darian's weapons. Darian uses a mace through the entire thing. In Life's Daughter, that's where Ephema, who is the second main character, first gets her weapon, and that is the weapon of her goddess, who they find out is absolutely bat butt crazy but not dead. And then the last thing is she wears a globe that connects her with the goddess, and it has a connection to the story. And so those are they were each important items that define who the book's about and how it goes together. Because the first one is really his book, the second one is more hers coming into her own, and the third is those things coming together in order to solve their quest.
Okay, that sounds good. I will have to make a point because I got your social media links. We will have to get your co-authors. I didn't
Yes.
realize you had one, so we can throw that in there. So if you want to check out, obviously, if you like these books, you'll want to find his other stuff, even though he was sick and couldn't make this episode, because he was going to try. But
Yes, well,
that's the joke
he's a
we
good
say.
guy.
Yes, he's trying, because that's the joke I would tell my kids if they said that, right? But
His wife would like that.
so okay, so Lich, when they Lich, I'm gonna get this right one of these days. When they call it back, are we talking like zombies or just walking skeletons or various states of decay? Like what does this look like for people that aren't familiar with the lore?
In this particular book, so you do get necromancy that can pull back any of those kinds of things. With this particular one, you get a lot, mostly skeletal warriors. The way it's described is that generally they're skeletal warriors, but occasionally you get something that is much fresher and still a little bit gooey. But the outer organs and stuff tend to rot really, really quickly once the magic is working in it, and so you're mostly dealing with something that's more skeletal. So it's not the Walking Dead like you see in zombie movies. These tend to be faster moving. They're skeletal, claws, sharp, pointy teeth. And the older they are, they get more and more misshapen as the magic keeps putting them back together. But so they're scary. They're not something that I want to meet in a dark alley. Definitely not running down a mountain as fast as I can.
Yeah, that's where you trip and slide and it gets real ugly.
Hmm. Yep. Trip,
So,
slide, fall down. Bad
so
things happen.
where is the setting of this? Like, is it in? It's obviously it's a medieval kind of vibe, but is it like a proto Europe? Is it tropical? Like, what kind of environment is this story happening in?
This is one of the fun things with this is and it's one of my favorite things about a quest fiction kind of story is that you get to move through different environments. So where we start, we're up in the mountains, and they end up coming down to the coast. So you get some different environments as they go through that, and that's a little bit more proto Europe. You get more fir forest, and then it comes down into oaks and scrub oaks, which is a lot like where I live. And then they come down, and you've got this coastal area. Later in the books, they go up into an area that is a lot more like Mongolia. It's got kind of the steppes, and they meet horsemen there. And then they end up on the southern continent, and that is a tropical area. So there's a lot of travel that happens, and writing travel sometimes really, really, really sucks because you get that whole I can't just say and 3 weeks passed again. So you have to figure out what's the most important things that go in there to make it so the travel is fun to read. Um, but this way I get to play with lots of different biomes and how they move through it and how they react to that. Going, well, gosh, the place that I'm from, this is what this should be like, and this is totally, completely, and utterly foreign. And I had a good time with being able to kind of sketch that out and go with latitudes and longitudes and kind of tracing it onto what a globe looks like. What kinds of things would I get growing where? What kind of people would live in the various places? What other things would they encounter?
Okay, so that's the environment. Now let's talk about the main characters. Obviously, you have the Dante, the paladin in training. You have
Darian.
Darian. I'm sorry, I thought it said Dante on the cover.
No, it's Darian. Darian. Darian.
I'm colorblind, so those covers are a little bit difficult for me to read the
Yes,
writing on.
they have to be.
Okay, so Darian, and then the female is the other character. What can you tell us about them, and then we'll move on to like the secondary characters because you've pretty much established the bad guy is the necromancer.
Yeah. So Darian and Ephema. Darian, like I say, he is a young journeyman. He is very certain that the only thing he's ever wanted to be in his entire life is to be a knight like his mother. His father was a fisherman who was lost to the sea. And then he's got siblings, and they have a very, very close family bond. And that was really fun to work with because all of his family is important somewhere in the narrative, but they're all very different. So that's kind of a fun thing. but he's right at that edge. After they become journeymen is when they will officially swear themselves into a seven service, and that's a lifetime calling. You stay with it until something kills you, or you die of natural causes, mostly the
And then come back from the dead.
and then now knights and priests. So there's two different classes. There's those who follow in the warrior path, and then there's those who follow the priesthood. They can't be brought back unless something really bad has happened, and that does happen on occasion. So there's a whole storyline about that I won't spoil. But so that's what he wants, and he's in a convoy with his final training when everything goes completely upside down. Ephema is a girl who has been raised up in the top of the mountains, and she is a priestess who is dedicated to the goddess of life. The problem is that common knowledge is that while the goddess of life was not killed, she went bat crazy during the war, and anybody who followed her also went mad and became monsters. So Ephema is the only living healer in the world and the only follower of the goddess of life who is not absolutely out of her mind. And that all has to do with her bloodline and who she is. But she's been raised in the mountains with just her parents, and then they took off several years ago because they were going to go solve this Lich problem, and told her, "We'll be back. You stay here. You'll be safe. All is well." And they never came home. So she has been there on her own for several years now, waiting to find out what's going to happen. And then, like say, this knight pretty much drops right on her doorstep, and he's all broken up and bruised and battered. And she looks at him and goes, "Oh, you pathetic little thing. I can't just leave you out here." So she drags him back into her cave, heals him up, and the two of them start to figure out what they're going to do from there. For poor Darian, the whole experience is a problem because, again, he knows as well as anybody else that there are no more healers in the world. And so it's kind of a shock to figure out that he just found the last one, and what is he supposed to do with that? Um, so that's where it starts. I really like these because they're both, it's really not young adult. They're in their early 20s. So you've kind of got that new adult, which was never a thing that took off. But these people who are kind of expanding, and they're right on that edge of figuring out who they are and what it is that they really want. Darian has to really through the series, he has to address the idea of faith, and does he want what he wants because it's what his mother did, or does he really have that connection with the deity? Is this really a thing that he wants, and how dedicated is he, especially once he gets outside of the order and starts to encounter other people and figures out, gosh, they live differently, they believe differently, they have all these things going on, and what does that mean for my personal faith and where I stand in my journey and what I want? And at certain points he's given the option to leave. It's what there's another knight that points out to him that you don't have to do this, you could leave anytime you want. And he has to hit that, but do I want to leave? What is it that I want? And with Ephema, she's coming back into being part of the world, and accepting that there's a place for her outside of her little family, her little cave, her very isolated existence. And what does that mean to be a part of a much, much bigger world? And does she want that? And don't we all go through that, especially around that age, that college age, where you're now too adult to be a kid, but yet you don't feel like you're adult enough to figure out what you want with your life. And yet everything that happens in that time of our lives, it shapes everything else that comes after that. So they're both on these journeys, and at the same time they're carrying the huge weight of very literally saving the people that they love and the world that they live in. So it's a lot to ask of them as they're trying to figure out, who they want to be when they grow up.
It's weird that by worshiping the god of death, they're saving lives by any of the
Uh-huh.
necromancer. So at some level, they're also, worshiping life by killing, which is kind of that, duology of man. If you're a fan of Full Metal Jacket, that they joked about, right? Like it's an interesting concept to think about.
It's part of what's fun with it, because it takes so many of those things that we see as being scary, as being negative in a lot of books, and yet that's where their lives are, because they worship death, because it is the natural end of all things. And if you don't have death, then the whole cycle breaks down. You kind of have to have that duality. You have to have that ability to move on. And how can you go to the halls of the redeemed? How can you move into this greater glory if you don't pass through death first? So for them, it's all there's a lot of philosophy around that. But they have their armor is made out of the bones of their ancestors. And it's magically heightened so that it doesn't break up nearly as easily, and all these other things that happen. And it's always about that whole death is necessary. It's not evil. It's just inevitable because that's the way the cycle works.
So
And
does
when
he
you
have to
get a
go
lich or
back?
something that breaks that, it's bad.
So does he go back and have to like retrieve the corpse of his mother to add it to the bone pile for the bones of his ancestors for future armor?
No, Loretta is a part of the story, because that's a lot of fun too. Nothing quite like having your commanding officer also be your mom, especially when she gives you a direct order to cut your hair because you look like you have a mop on your head. And that's where some of the humor comes in, is those family moments. But it's in when they say ancestors, it's the knights that have passed before them. So there's lots of knights, and it ends up that their bone and the remnants of who they were are brought to the temples, and then that's what the armor ends up being made out of.
And given that they led a life of the paladin of service, there's probably some naturally imbued magic already, which is probably why they couldn't be called back. I'm digging. So
Yeah.
you mentioned that she's the last healer. When you say healer, do you mean magical healer? Because I imagine even with necromancers on the loose, you're going to have someone who knows, like, hey, I rubbed this bark on this wound and it's going to heal a little bit.
Yeah, magical healers. She's the last that can call upon divinity in order to magically heal something. So you get wise women, you get herbalists, you get things like that. She actually has some of those skills as well, because when you're living off by yourself, it only makes sense to figure out that, gosh, there's some of these herbs and roots and stuff that are really quite good for you. And she sells a lot of those to the villagers that live down at the bottom of her mountain. That way she can get things that she needs. So she understands the body from a medicinal kind of healer fashion, but also she's able to call upon her goddess and to use that divine power to enact magical healing.
Okay,
And
that makes sense.
she can heal pretty much anything short of a mortal wound, but it's very wearing to do so. So she has to be careful with it, because she can run herself out and then you pass out for a while. It takes a lot of energy to be that kind of a conduit.
So how long are these books?
About 300 to 400 pages. They come in the 85, or well, I think the shortest one is like 78,000 words, so it's 78 to 90,000 words. About 385 pages.
Are they out in audiobooks for people that prefer to listen?
Not yet. We're working on that. My husband does great voices, and so we're learning how we can do audio and get the editing and all those kinds of great things, because I really, really want him to be the narrator for it. So it's coming. That is coming. But they're in ebook and they're in paperback right now. You can buy the books individually currently. There may or may not be an omnibus coming, probably towards the first of the year, after I get the prequel done, and then we'll put them all together into a set.
Will this be the only way people get the prequel, or it'll be for sale individually as well?
Oh, the prequel will be available as well. That way people can get it either in a bundle or all by themselves. I am happy to sell people my work in any format that I can get them to it in.
Okay.
It for them. There we go. Words. I can words.
So what was the role you had versus your co-author? Like, was you just totally 50-50? Did, one person write primary and the other kind of edited? Like, how did your partnership with your co-author work for this one?
So this was really cool. So Matt and I met clear back in the 90s when play-by emails were really, really popular through the Yahoo groups and things like that. And we met playing a X-Men spinoff. So it was X-Men fan fiction. And everybody would write their own little character and you'd do all the responses and stuff. And so we've stayed friends for a really long time. And we've co-written some stuff back and forth this way before, but always just for, kicks and giggles kind of thing. And I had an idea about where this was going to start and kind of what the main storyline was, but I needed some input and I needed somebody to play off of, because I kind of wanted to see how that would go. So I sent him an opening chapter and went, hey, pretend this is a play by email, send me the next part. because I'd come up with Ephema as a character, I'd come up with the background, but I was really struggling to get Darian's personality right and to get something that was going to be appealing there. So he took on Darian as the main writer of that character, and I took on Ephema as the main writer there, and we would send each other chunks back and forth and back and forth. And we wrote the 85,000 book took about, gosh, 2 months to write that way, just in those big chunks. And then we passed the secondary and tertiary characters back and forth. Then I had to go back through and I did all the editing to make sure that the voice was even between everything and that we'd been consistent, all of that kind of stuff. So I did the storyboarding and took those characters, and then he took the other side of it, and then that kind of expanded into the other books.
Okay. So back on the AOL, and we sacrificed robots to get online.
Clear back then. That's when I met him. By this point, it was the age of Google Docs, because the first book came out 3 years ago. And so 3, 4, something like that. I'd have to look at it. But so we were just going back and forth on a Google Doc, and then it'd be drop a message that says the next part's in there, go and read it, and then add the next section.
So when did the first book come out? So it wasn't written in the 90s then.
No, that's just when I met him originally. And then we've stayed friends, and then we wrote this book. I think it was released was 2019, because it was right before these were meant to come out within the way that we had it. They were going to come out like every 6 months. And then the entire world exploded, and I had a cancer diagnosis, and then I broke my back, and my mom had brain surgery in there, and his work exploded. And so all of the life things meant that it got stretched out over several more years than it was anticipated. But I think it still all came together in a way that was really satisfying.
So I did a quick look on the Amazon page. They say you published it February 2021. So
okay, that's about right then.
Okay. I was just like, when you said that Google Docs, I'm like, wait, was Google Docs around in the 90s?
No, not that. No, that was just when we met, and so we've known each other for that long.
So, is there any plans to do more in the world, do you think, with your co-author? I think you said his name was Matt.
Yeah, there's definitely some plans there, because there are 2 continents that we don't even touch on in this particular set, where other things have gone on. So I know what that background is, and some of it I have to just decide: do I tell stories that were running at the same time as this one because other things were happening in other places, or do I take and I do the next set, which is now that this problem has been solved, what happens in those other places? So there's definitely some spin-off possibility. It's just deciding when I want to go back to it.
It's not like you don't have a lot of other projects to go back to as well.
Again, we were talking about the Idea Fairy earlier, and right now there's some other things that Idea Fairy wants to do more. So we're going to work on those things first and try to get a couple of other series out. But this is one that I could definitely swing back to, because the world was so much fun, and the ideas are still there, and there are places that have not been explored that we could definitely go into.
It sounds like you enjoyed working with Matthew T. Summers. There we go. I pulled that up. Okay. So when you talk about, obviously this is an action story, so there is combat. Like, what does that combat look like? Is it in vague terms where, like, oh, I thrust my sword forward and he's magically dead, or do you get descriptive with it? Like, how would you describe the way the combat is written?
Some of it depends on the combat, because combat's an interesting thing when it comes from a writing perspective, and even from just the way that you view it. There are some things that are so big that you kind of pull the camera back and you have general movement of, so the horse are coming here and this is coming here, and that kind of thing. So we get some of that. A lot of mine is, because it's a very character driven, it is what I call thrust and blow. So it gets in there and says, yep, and he swings his mace, and it takes the skeleton's head right off, and it goes poof. But because so often they're fighting undead monsters, you don't get what I call the CSI treatment, where we dive down deep into the tissue and we'll watch the blood burble and all that kind of stuff. We don't get grotesque with it, but it's a lot that fantasy style fighting, where it is sword and shield, and it'll talk about pushing something off your shield, stabbing them, all that kind of thing. So
Okay. You could you
fairly typical combat for fantasy.
you could go and have some fun with it if the series would allow it. Remember Hocus Pocus, where the guy cuts his mouth open and he can finally talk. The boyfriend that's now
Yes.
the skeleton, and he's coughing out like mothball kind of thing. Like you could have that kind of thing, that scene where the
Oh,
zombie
so
or
gross.
the zombie, where the undead skeleton thing explodes and now they're coughing in like bone dust.
Yes, they do have that problem sometimes, or things that go flying through the air, and you're like, okay, ducking the skull, so somebody else hit it. Some of my favorite sub characters are actually the war horses that they ride, because the horses have their very own distinct personality, and the war horses are trained to stomp on the undead, and they have a very good time doing it. And so you get that occasionally where it's like, oh, watch out, duck, because the horse is kicking, and there goes the skeleton. It's like, well, look, go. Because they do not like the undead, and they're very good at their job, and distinct personalities. My in-laws, my sister-in-law and brother-in-law, are fantastic people who also run a ranch, and they breed horses and that kind of thing. So all of my horse information comes from the two of them, and anything that I wrote that had horses in it, I had to send it to them, and they had to go through and they would tell me, yes, this works, no, that doesn't, think about this, you're going to have to adjust that. So it was a huge boon, because fantasy readers and those who know horses really pick up on when you get the horse stuff wrong. And so it was always sending it to them to go, is this acceptable horse stuff? Because it's the way it plays in my brain. And sometimes it worked, and sometimes like, nope, you have to do that entirely differently. Right, got it.
So horse people are to fantasy what gun nuts are to sci-fi.
Yes, absolutely. That it is
Okay,
just that
I
way,
can have
and you do the very best that you can, and then you take whatever other blows may fall.
That's why I don't do near future, because what do you mean I got the gun wrong? I made it up. It's whatever I say. I don't have to worry
Aw,
about like, did I put the wrong button in the wrong place on this, Russian made insert whatever random weapon, you know?
absolutely. Yeah, and some of this, like we talked about at one point, that there's places where I could go, yes, I know that this is actually not what would happen, but hand wavium magic means that it's fine. Go with it.
Okay.
That is the beauty of
Um,
fantasy.
oh, is the necromancer that's causing all the problems still alive, or is this just his magic is unleashed and now they have the consequences?
He is a undead construct. So he himself is a type of undead, but lots more fully formed than the things that he raises. And so he's a nasty piece of work. He's all made of blood magic and doom and badness. But yeah,
So
he's
presumably he made himself immortal so that when he died, he
yep.
didn't die.
Yeah, he
Okay.
didn't die. He's unable to cross over. He doesn't want to. And he is definitely not as fragile as some of the things that he raises from the dead. So he is a load of trouble.
So is the undead that are getting called back only humans, or are they like calling back animal undead too?
Only humans. So that was another thing we had to do a lot of work on, was did we want to deal with having all of these, animals, and also what size human? Because if children are coming back, that gets really creepy really fast. And it also becomes really hard to write and to keep your audience when you've got your Death Knights having to kill off teeny tiny little undead,
Just
because
call them
that was
hobbit
problematic.
undeads.
Yeah, well, it could be, but that drove it in a grim, dark direction that I didn't want to go. So there is some rules around the magic. Only humans can be brought back, except for under a very specific set of spells that is used a couple of places in the book that allow something that is non-human to be brought back. But in general, it's humans, and they have to be over a certain mass, otherwise they die normally. That way, we didn't have to deal with chasing down
So
kids,
so someone who's
because there was just no way to do that.
so someone who was super petite was pretty much guaranteed they could never be called back.
Right. Yep. If you were petite enough that you could be, that you could be mistaken for a child, you probably would end up in the child's graveyard and you would be fine. Children, babies, things like that, because I just did not want to go through the math of trying to figure out what happens when, a babe in arms passes away, which happens frequently in these kinds of environments, just because of medicine being what it is. I did not want to figure out toddlers coming back from the dead.
Okay, so then let me ask you this. You mentioned if you were petite enough that they couldn't call you back, you'd get put in the children's graveyard. Does that mean it's the children's graveyard being sanctified that prevents them from coming back? Or does it mean that's just where they class them because they know that graveyard, they don't have to worry about coming back, so they don't have to guard it?
Both. So it kind of depends on where you're at. It used to be that it was all because it was very, very sanctified. But one of the things they've started to run into as people have managed to expand, because so many people got wiped out in the early war that there were just some little camps of people who were kind of surviving. And over the last 100 years, they've managed to build up the kingdom and get some of their population back. And as the population grows, you get people that go, well, what if we don't really buy into this? We see the undeads here, but maybe the divine isn't the only way to defeat them. If our walls are strong enough, if we have enough weapons, if we scatter them far enough. So it's one of the things that the world is dealing with, is that you're starting to get those that even though they can see what's going on, they don't know that they necessarily want to worship. So that changes things. So it depends on where the area is. Some of them are sanctified as well as being in position for people they just know aren't going to come back, and others they just set aside a children's graveyard, and it's only for those that are small enough or young enough that they know that they're not coming back. It's
Okay.
better to have it sanctified, but people are interesting. The way they expand and the way they decide to believe as things change for them.
Absolutely. So we've talked about the world. So have you had any scenes where like a dog, because dogs going after bones is a common kind of trope when you see the TV shows, movies, cartoons, whatever, it's a dog in the bone. And it's even become an idiom. So do you have any scenes where a dog is going after the undead, like trying to gnaw on the leg bone or something?
No, no, we don't actually have. I don't think there's any dogs in this particular book. I was so focused on the horses that we get a lot of horses, and those chase the undead around, but we don't have any dogs chasing the bones. I'll have to keep that for the prelude. See if there's an appropriate place to put a dog chasing the undead to eat their bones, because that'd be interesting.
Is there anything about the books in the world of the War of the Lich that we didn't talk about that you think they really need to know to kind of a flavor?
I think the other thing is that you get so Darian and Fema are not alone, and this is where the found family comes in, because they travel with other knights, and I really love those relationships, because it is kind of that they're bound together in their service, both by their belief, but also there's a military aspect to it where they are serving together, and they're that bound of brothers. They call each other brothers, and it doesn't matter whether you're a boy or a girl. It's just all brothers because it's easier, and they take care of each other. And I think that's a lot of fun. They have Tabor is with them for most of the books. Tabor is the senior knight. He's the one that makes a lot of their decisions and that kind of thing, and figuring out where they all fit in there. That's kind of an interesting thing. They have Annual. Daniel is irreverent about everything. He is definitely an eat, drink, and be merry, because tomorrow we don't know what we're going to fight, and we might die, and I'm okay with that. Daniel is a favorite for that kind of thing. So you have these other knights that all have their own personality, their own way that they're dealing with what their lives are, but yet they're all called to the same service. And I love playing with that. I love playing with the dynamics of what are the different things that they do and what are the different things that they want, and each one of them has their own life going on, but they all come together in order to make these things happen. So I enjoyed that. I enjoyed Darian's family, and for Afema to see functional family where she lost hers, and the way that both these families of the knights and the families that are Darian's family kind of reach out to say, you can have a family here. Even though your biological family is gone, that doesn't mean that you're alone. And I think that's a thing that we see in a lot of fantasy, and it's something that people like reading, because a lot of times we suffer from an endemic of loneliness. They talk about it on the news and stuff, that people are lonely, and so a lot of times we seek that in our books to say, here's somebody who builds the family that they want from these personalities around them, and they do all of those things to take care of each other. So that's some of my favorite stuff in there, is writing those relationships, having those different people with those different ideals, and yet they always come together to take care of what needs to be done.
Okay. Um, I know a lot of writing will sometimes have deeper undertones. Is that something you lean into, or if it's there, it's incidental to a good adventure?
A little bit of both. With this one, I leaned into it a little bit simply because it is a book that you have to deal with religion when you're dealing with paladins. If you're basically, it's paladins and clerics. She's a cleric and he's a paladin. They serve deities. Um, there's the question of faith. There's a question of sacrifice. There's a question of what are you willing to give in order to take care of the people around you. So there is some of that there's definitely some leaning into to say, these are some of the things that I believe about this. And then there's a lot of it that just is part of telling a good story, and then I'll have people come back and say, "This part right here was absolutely brilliant." And I'm like, "That is not the part where I was trying to be brilliant in any way, but I'm glad it worked for you. Yay!" So, and I
Hmm.
think most authors get that where you're like, the curtain was blue because I looked over and I saw a blue curtain. And then somebody will tell you, well, the blue curtain represented the sky and the freedom and and it's like, okay, that's great. So I hope that people find their own, their own interpretation. But there is some things that really I did put a lot of thought into because it is dealing with those kinds of themes with deity, with what it means to be alive, what it means to take care of other people, and what it means to have faith, because that's where their power comes from. And if they lose their faith and they don't have that power anymore, then what do you do next? What does that mean to you if you are a person of faith and you lose it or your faith changes? How do you develop that? That all is something that's kind of an underlying message, and it's not there to convince anybody of one thing or another, but it's about that thought process of, what do you really believe and what are you willing to sacrifice for?
How much of the topic being what life and death, a death god, and the way you handled that is affected by, given that when you were writing this, you were dealing with your own dance with death with your cancer scare. Do you think that influenced or impacted the way you told the story?
Oh yeah. Yeah, because when you think about I could be not here. Um, that is a weird, weird thought. When they told me that I had cancer and that it was well-developed cancer, it was aggressive. It was moving very, very aggressively, and things were really touch and go. And it's like, but I have a family here, and I have all these things that are important to me, and I can't afford to leave yet because I have all these things to take care of. And then I'm sitting here writing this book that is all about, you know, you go when you go because you've got these things to do, and how hard they fight to not go because they still have things that they need to do. And a lot of that came from that struggle that said, nope, nope, I have a daughter to raise, I have, all these other things going on. There's just no way, that there's just no way. And so yeah, there was a lot of that thought that went into there. And what does it mean to have to kind of stare death down and go, how do I accept this? And can I accept this? And will I accept this? And those are still questions that I'm still working on, because I don't know that you ever come to those until you've passed through that. But it definitely informed the way that I wrote the book, because I dealt with all of that, and I'd stood there and stared into that particular abyss and gone, not today. Let's choose not today, okay?
You're
Even though
giving
it
me
wasn't my choice in the long run.
right. You give me vibes of the Predator scene where he goes, "I ain't got time to bleed."
Yep,
Um,
yep.
but so
I've
I,
got no
I will
time for this.
I will say that your experience was significantly different than mine, because at least when you're at war in the military, you have some influence on the outcome, right? Like you could do things a
Yep.
little bit different if you trained hard enough. Whereas when it comes to ailments and illness, I mean, you could have lived a perfectly healthy life, like that, heart healthy, exercise all the time, and still illnesses can happen. And sometimes, like obviously, you can affect it in a general sense, but still, sometimes you could do everything right and still fate is fickle. And that definitely changes the equation. Whereas for us in the Army, at least when we were in Iraq, we knew we had a hand to play in how that all went down. And so I could imagine it gives you a different approach to the topic, which is why I asked.
Yeah, there's a point where there's a significant death, and Ephema, as a priestess of life, is trying to understand it, trying to understand why, and why her companions aren't more upset. And they say, well, but he died doing exactly what he wanted to do. that this is what he has been a part of for his entire life. And so for him, this was kind of fulfilling that purpose. And she thinks that that is about the stupidest thing that anybody has ever said to her ever. Because as far as she's concerned, that shouldn't ever be your purpose. Your purpose should not be to work towards death. And they say, well, but for him, there are great things waiting on the other side in the halls of the redeemed, which is kind of like Valhalla. The
I was
halls
about
of the
to
redeemed.
ask because I was like, I wonder
Yeah.
what she would think about Valhalla. That was going to be my next question.
That's exactly the thing. It's a lot like Valhalla. They move over to the halls of the redeemed, and they serve with their Lord on that side. And for her, it's just a case of, but that's so dumb. He shouldn't have to die. And for her, the breakdown there comes from a moment of, if I could have got to him, I could have saved him. But they wouldn't let her go because the knowledge that they had as fighters was, if you had gone after him, we all would have died. And this was the choice that he made. Was he made the sacrifice throw to let everybody else get out. And you can't dishonor that sacrifice by second guessing what it was that he wanted. And it's a really hard thing for her to deal with, because as this force of life, she always wants to step in and to heal them and to save them. And to deal with the idea that being part of the world means that she can't always save them is a really, really hard thing. And that did tie to that cancer thing, where it's like, but I want this to turn out okay. And the uncertainty that said it might not was awful, because it's like, but I want it this way. It should be this way. And I'm really lucky that it was that way, because I had the world's most amazing cancer doctor. And, she came in and she said, we're going to kick this thing in the teeth, and this is the way it's going to be. And, we're doing surgery, and anything that you don't need that has a problem, I'm taking. And I said, please do that. So they took almost 3 pounds material out of my abdomen. Anything that looks suspicious, she sucked it out. And, I've been cancer free now for almost 4 years. So, well, in remission anyway. But you go through that, and you say, what is the nature of life and death, and that difference, and when do you have any control, and when don't you, and how do you give into that with any kind of grace?
Don't go gently into that dark night. I get it.
Nope. I'm
All
not
right.
dramatic.
So was there anything else that you think they ought to know about this series before we wrap this up?
I think that we've hit most of the highlights. I'm trying to think here. Like I say, we have funny horses, we have family going on. Um, I'm particularly proud of the relationship between Darian and his brother Fresson. That comes from raising boys, because they're definitely brothers, and there's a whole lot of ribbing going on, but they're also, again, it's that whole, I can pick on him, but if anybody else does, I have to kill them. So we had a lot of fun with that. But no, mostly I'd love for people to read it. Let me know what they think. I had a great time writing it, and I think that it's a really, really good read. I get great feedback on it, so I'm hoping that that's all in a positive direction.
So if you met these two characters, and they met you in a dark alley, and they knew that you were Jena Rey, the creator of this universe, the tormentor of their souls, the god of their creation, and you met them in a dark alley, how do you see that playing out?
Oh boy. I would be in for a significant lecture over several things that happened, and several choices that I made. In the end, though, I think that we would all retire to Darian's sister has this amazing inn where she serves kind of a fish bake that she's particularly famous for, and these little muffins that have currants in it. So I think after a little bit of lecturing, and probably a few I'm sorries about that, we would all retire there, and we would drink cider, and we would eat baked fish, and it would turn out all right in the end.
So you're on my list of bad authors. You, Katie Cross, and Melissa McShane are on my growing list of authors I cannot read when I'm hungry, because you're bad for diets, writing all this food stuff in there.
Oh, yeah, I love writing food stuff. So yeah, these are not books to go into hungry, because they will make you hungry. That was one of the comments I got from my son when he read the first one. Is he went, "There's a lot of food in there. I want to eat all of it." And I'm like, good.
I
Then,
get it.
I have accomplished my purpose.
That's where you get like some of the bigger IPs have the Dungeons and Dragons cookbook, the Twilight cookbook, or whatever main property, because the ones that mention food, everyone's like, okay, but how do I make that? Right?
I own a lot of those books for exactly that reason. Where it's like, nope, I really, really do have to have this. And yeah, my recipe bookshelf is stuffed full of that kind of thing because I
I
love
got
them.
the
And
recipe bookshelves or books I inherited from my grandmother. So it's a lot of like the Good Housekeeping from the 80s cookbook or whatever. But if
I
it
have
ain't
those
broke,
too.
don't fix it. All right.
I tell you the
So
truth.
lastly, as we wrap this up, if you could live in this world, would you?
No.
I didn't even think about that one.
Not now I might live in the world where they're two after the series is over, because that's a very different kind of place. But it's a really, really tough world. Loss is a continual factor for just about everybody. You're always dealing with this uncertainty. You're dealing with what happens when what that creates in politics and what that creates in all of those things. And so it would be a rough place to live. I don't know that I would want to do that. Um, but the place that they're hoping to build, I would live in that world. I'll just leave it at that.
Okay. And with that being said, before I let you go, dear listener, this is the point where I remind you to please be kind and speak your mind on the reviewing platforms. Your reviews help the right readers find the right book, so do your part. And with that, Jana, whichever you prefer to go by in this moment, if listeners and viewers at home wanted to track you down on the interwebs, how might they do that?
Well, fortunately or unfortunately, I'm really bad at hiding on the internet. So you can find me under Jana S Brown or Jena Rey Author over on Facebook. I'm Jana Stocks on Twitter because I had that name before I got married a million years ago. So that's still over there. You can find me on Amazon under those names. And if you go to opalkingdompress.com, that is my press. And so I have links to pen names there. I have open calls for anthologies there. That's kind of the heart of where I put things. And one day I will get a big fancy link tree like Blasters and Blades have, and then I'll be able to just give you that one link. But you can find me out there. Those names pretty much almost always come back to me.
That fancy link tree came in very handy when Spotify bought out Anchor FM, and instead of a nice, clean like web address, it became so much gobbledygook with dashes and parentheses and slashes. Yeah, so Linktree saved us on that one, because now I can just be like, seriously, just go to the Linktree. It's got all the things. Because ideally, like, you don't want people to go to too many extra hops to get to where you want them to go, because they'll lose interest, right? They say the more times you have to click them, the follow button, the less likely are to buy through from a marketing standpoint. But
Absolutely.
like trying to get anyone to remember the new Spotify addresses, the way they do it, it's just
yeah, it's a gigantic pain. So yeah, I'm with you. I've got to get that all put together. But as I've mentioned before, I am on vacation mode until my sweetheart and I get back from our anniversary trip. And then after that, I have a list. And Linktree is one of the things on my hit list. But the most central place is Opal Kingdom Press. Otherwise, you can find me on Amazon and on all the socials.
And we will link to all that in the show notes. And you can find us on our Linktree, linktr.ee, Linktree/Blasters and Blades podcast, where we link to all the things: the bits, shoots, the rumbles, the YouTubes, the TikToks, the Twitters. We have our Blasters and Blades Facebook group and Facebook page. We have our email for professional purposes only over there at blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. Again, Blasters and Blades podcast at gmail.com for professional purposes only. Send all the shenanigans to Madam Stabby Stab on the Instagram, Twitters, and the emails. She's here for it. She might make you cry, but that's your problem, not mine. We have our website, which, like I mentioned, a bunch of gobbledygook. But if you follow the link tree and you go to our website over on Spotify's website, you can support the show for as little as 99 cents a month. You can help keep the lights on, or you can support the show more directly at buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Again, buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Be sure to put in the comment section this for the podcast, and I promise I will keep my co-hosts duly caffeinated. They will drink that coffee bear coffee till they float on a river of Java, and man, that sounds delicious. It wouldn't be a river after me, because I'd drink it all. And if you go to in the show notes for Coffee Brand Coffee. Use the code Podcast Grunts. You get 10% off. We get a little bit of kickback. These episodes aren't free to produce, and you're helping with the overhead when you do that. And oh, by the way, you're supporting an American company that hires American. It's not a dropship company. They actually roast it here on their location. So it's a good thing. Everybody wins. I really am a big proponent of shopping local. Like I said, it's just, to me, the less hops in the supply chain, the better it is for the environment. And just like I said, everybody wins. And so with that,
peppermint hot chocolate's amazing, by the way, just, to break in there. They have a whole hot chocolate line, and the regular's good. The peppermint is better. The caramel hot chocolate might be a sin. It's just kind of amazeballs.
I got the peppermint hot chocolate thinking I would get some of it, and I made 1 cup, took a sip. I said, this is good. And my mom happened to be visiting because we got that for Christmas last year. And she's like, let me try. This is mine now. And she took the bag with her. Mom, I paid for this. 14 hours of labor. I'm like, okay, you win.
Moms always win.
It's the mom thing, right? What are you going to do? All right. And with that, I appreciate your time, dear listener. Thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. For my crazy co-host, I am J.R. Handley, and this was the Blasters and Blades podcast. We'll be back next week at the same time, where we'll indulge our love of nerd culture, cheesy jokes, and all things that go boom. This was fun. Thank you for coming on finally to talk about one of your books.
I'm excited.
We'll have to get you back for some of your other personalities and your other books and mix it up a little bit. This isn't the only thing you've ever written. So this was fun, and we'll have to do it again. And with that, people, I'm going to hit the end button. Wait for it.